She Is Serious, a podcast where we showcase female athletes and their impact beyond the game. Each week, we will be bringing on influential women in the world of sports and showing why they are so much more than athletes. My name is Taylor Hall. I'm a health and fitness influencer and collegiate athlete at Biola University. And this is my sis, my co-host, Ashley White. What's up, girl?
Hey y'all, hey, my name is Ashley White, a former student athlete manager for UNCW's women's basketball, a blogger, writer for Beautiful Ballers, and an advocate for women in sports. Thank you for tuning in weekly to She Is Serious podcast. And this is why female athletes are now to be taken seriously.
Hello.
Hey sis, welcome back to another episode of She Is Serious. We are super excited to have another special guest on our show today. Nikki Kett, how are you doing? We cannot wait to hear your sports story.
I'm great. Thank you guys for having me. So fun.
First, we always like to start off by asking our guests, what is your sports story? What got you into sports in the first place?
Yeah, such a, I think, a loaded question, but I started swimming at the country club, basically. And I remember one day my friends convinced me to stay late for practice. And I eventually joined the swim team when I was younger. And I went on to swim in college. And then after college, it just really had such a transformation on my life through sport, and I went into collegiate coaching. So right from college, I started coaching collegiately, and I kind of moved up the coaching ranks from Division III, and then I coached a little bit in the Ivy League, and then I coached at Michigan, and then eventually went on to create my own business where I work with, I say athlete-minded women, so former athletes, current athletes, however you know, some people still define themselves as the athlete. But now I work with women, not just in swimming, but in other sports as well. And so that's kind of been my journey. Lots of different lifetimes that I've lived in sport and in different ways, but yeah.
So what event did you compete in swimming, and how can you bring the awareness of the sport of swimming to people where they can be interested in it?
Yeah, so I swam the 200 breaststroke was my best event. And then I also swam individual medley, which was kind of every single stroke in one event. And what was the second part of that question?
How can people get, say, some people watch swimming during the Olympics. How can they pay attention to swimming more, especially in the collegiate aspect?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there's just more and more swimming that's being put on TV. And it is really fun that they're trying to make the league more professional with the ISL league. And then there's also just more meets that are being streamed online. So there's definitely athletes that you can follow and kind of track their progress throughout, not just the Olympic year, but every year, and kind of follow their progress. Yeah. And then I think just getting more involved in watching in season women's sports, obviously bringing more of the events to television and stuff like that. Getting more involved in the in season, just watching those really close dual meets that are fun to get behind. So
I know growing up in Arizona, swim was a huge thing because everyone wants to get in the water since it's so hot there. But how do you think that we can get swimming to be a bigger sport in other states, besides the Arizonas, the Californias, and the states that it's hot all year round?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely big in other states that don't have as much sunshine as well. We just don't notice it as much, but
okay, see, I don't even know, because I'm how would you get into a pool? But I guess that there's indoor pools, right? There's not always just outdoor pools.
Yeah. I went to school in Ohio, but there were always like so many big swim programs, club swimming programs in Ohio. But yeah, I mean, I think just in terms of like it being, people get involved during the summer. And I think across all sports, I mean, I think that everybody's experiencing this, but just finding ways to make it more fun to get into it when you're younger. And just, I think it's really important, not just for swimming, but to create like fun environments where people want to come and like they can, especially as a kid, learn about themselves and enjoy like being with other friends and not taking it so seriously as a young kid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I was a swimmer growing up. I started off swimming, but I got so burnt out because it was so serious from such a young age, which I understand because you only have a certain lifespan, especially when you're swimming and doing those individual sports. You see girls like Katie Ledecky going to the Olympics when they're 15 years old, which is insane. But like you see that you have to start training super intensely from a very young age. What have you seen as a coach, maybe where kids are getting burnt out early, especially at the college level? Is it like, oh, wow, I've been doing this for so long already and I just don't want to compete anymore?
Yeah, I think that can definitely be a part of it. Just being burnt out from all of the hours that we put in. And I think we have these, ingrained beliefs that the only way to get better is to train more, and that you have to like train this certain amount of time in order to get better. And I think there's so many other aspects of performance, which is like our mental well-being and actually like our energy and being able to enjoy that, how we're feeling ourselves, how we feel on a day to day. So I think that's part of it. I think the other piece is, we have parents that push people to like, you have to swim or you have to do this thing. And then you have the coaches kind of really pushing the same thing. And so I think when we don't allow athletes to make that decision for themselves, like really commit to like, this is what I want to do and I'm choosing this for me, and we have the external kind of controlling it, it's like subtly that underlying pressure, like you have to do this, you have to put in the work. And when it's not driven internally, I think that just creates a lot of resistance, a lot of burnt out athletes that are questioning like, well, I think internally, why am I doing this? But they're afraid to even voice that or feel like, they can walk away or do something else. And so I think just allowing people to make their own decisions and realizing like it's not always, if you want to take a break from sport and reset, like sometimes that can be the best thing for you, and just empowering people to make those choices. Like, what do you really want to do and why do you want to do it?
For sure,
100%.
because athletes have a voice that should be heard, and sometimes I feel like the platform is not given to them, or like you said, they may be afraid to speak just because maybe they're on like a specific rule, like you can't say this or else you'll be maybe kicked out or something. How were you able to transition from being a coach to now being a mentor for a lot of athletes, both former and current, in your business?
Yeah. So I really got into coaching because I just love the ability to develop yourself and use sport as a platform for that. And so that was always my primary reason for getting into coaching. I had amazing coaches that really preach the whole person and becoming that best version of yourself, and then using swimming as a platform to do that. And so when I got into coaching, I always had kind of that foundation. And then I also, I went on to get a master's degree in sports psych and kinesiology, which I was really interested in just understanding like what drives individual motivation and how do you motivate the individual. And then I got another degree in organizational dynamics, which was more leadership, culture, how environments impact leaders and how they impact individuals. And so I was coaching at different levels in Division 3 and then in Division 1. I was also getting these educational experiences. And so I was kind of like living it out and being able to just kind of deeply understand like what's happening here. How do I motivate people? But then also, how is the culture of this team or the culture of the leadership creating the experience for each athlete, and how does that impact things? So yeah, definitely through things that worked, I learned, but also things that didn't work that I was like, I don't agree with this as a leader. This is kind of toxic. It's doing harm to a lot of athletes. And from my own personal perspective, I felt like I got away from why I was in coaching in the first place. And so I decided to get my life coaching certification and kind of put in the plans to go and create my own business, which I didn't know exactly what that would look like. But I ended up working with a lot of athletes because those were the people in my network, other coaches. And I realized that so many of us had very similar belief systems, thought things that were happening just based on our conditioning as athletes, and very similar stories. And so that's kind of how I got to where I am now doing what I'm doing.
I feel like that happens with a lot of people who are in sports or maybe in coaching. They find that they kind of get away from the reason that they were in that position in the first place. And I think that's awesome what you're doing now. You're taking all of your experiences and then now really helping people through their struggles in life and in sports. What was your experience like at the University of Michigan? I know that you worked your way from D3 to D1, which the coaching trials and tribulations I've heard is like super brutal, you know, like working your way up. It's, you don't just get put at that top position unless you're super fortunate. So that's super amazing that you were able to work your way up to the University of Michigan, which is huge. What was your experience like there?
Yeah. So on one hand, I was super grateful for my experience at Michigan. And I think that I wanted to experience coaching at the highest level. And so just being able to coach Olympic medalists and prep people for that, and to prep people for world championships and like really see swimming at the highest level was something that I'll always be grateful for. And at the same time, I think that the way we operated took away a lot of the joy for me. And yeah, it's just that, you know, there's so much pressure at that level to win and to perform. And some of my years at Michigan were the COVID years as well. And so it was,
wow,
dealing with COVID as well. And still having this pressure to win and compete and to perform. And I just think like deeply what I believe in is that you can win and perform and you can have fun doing it. And
100%, yes.
At times where just at that level, like just the pressure and not having, leaders not having the tools to manage the pressure, then the way those behaviors came across, the way we were coaching, and then dealing just with the mental health crisis that happened throughout COVID, that was really hard for everybody. So it was kind of so many things happening at one time. I learned a ton from being in that. But I think I just also started to question for myself, like, why am I doing this when I don't have a week off at all for vacation, like ever? It's just kind of 24/7. I'm not feeling lit up by my life because it's just go, go, go all the time. And so I just really started reflecting on like, what is the lifestyle I want to have and what is the impact I want to have? And so there were just things that weren't in alignment as I was coaching there, which is what made me kind of want to leave and kind of redefine what coaching looked like for me.
How big is mental health in not only sports, but swimming? I know, especially because it's just you don't have a team to rely on. So you have to really, all that pressure falls on yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I think it's, you have coaches that have so many responsibilities on top of just coaching all the things behind the scenes. And I think that number one, we have to make sure that we are supporting our coaches and their mental health, because then on top of that, you have a culture that can be struggling with their mental health and the times that we're all going through. And so then there's like still the pressure to win and perform. And so it's really hard, I think, on the coaches that don't necessarily have these tools or the ability to like really processing emotions, like dealing with disappointment, dealing with sadness, dealing with all of the things that go on a day-to-day basis, and being able to like hold space for our athletes who also are going through those challenges. And so I think until I've thought a lot about this, but I think until we find a way to really address culture and change the way that we're doing things on a day to day, and question like, why do we have to train, 30 hours a week? Why is it always about doing more, and making the shift from just about like quantity and to keep pushing all those things into really like, let's think about the well-being of the human. How about get some more sleep, like manage
Yeah.
stress.
So, Nikki, I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but that's like super. I have to ask you this question because I think
Yeah.
it's so important that we do have that life sport balance. And for me, like I always wanted to just play basketball or swim all of the time because if I wasn't doing that, I felt like there's going to be someone get in front of me. So how would training less hours actually be more beneficial? And how do we make athletes understand that it is actually important to take rests?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and I think there is that fear, right? And that's why it goes on well beyond sport, where we're like, if I do less, then I will fall behind. Or if I do less, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. And so, number one, like looking at because our subconscious is always kind of creating our reality. So if those are our beliefs, if we believe I have to do more in order to be successful, then you always are in that grind. You're always going to be chasing your life, whether it's on the basketball court, in the pool, or beyond that. You always have that kind of entanglement with your success. And I think the other piece of this that's important is really addressing why. Like, why do we have that drive? And it's important to, we can set goals to better ourselves, but when the goals and reaching the goals becomes about, number one, like our identity, what we think about ourselves, how worthy we think we are, what we think other people think about us. I think so often the goals that we have are driven by this underlying, I don't feel good enough. And when I reach that goal or I achieve that thing, I will be more confident or respected or worthy or whatever it is. And so it's kind of checking in with those things like, do I want this goal because I love the sport and I love competing, and I call it expansive discomfort. Like I'm willing to go through the discomfort of making myself better, but not making that mean that I'm more worthy as I get to that goal. Or forced discomfort, I think, is when we're so attached to that outcome that we can't turn off, because our brain it's kind of about survival at that point. Like, if I don't do this, then what are my peers going to think about me? What are my coaches going to think about me? I'm going to be embarrassed, or I won't measure up, basically. And so our primitive brain is all about that survival mechanism. And so if we act from that place, like we're always just going to be on that hamster wheel. And so it really, I think, comes down to like healing our relationship with ourselves and finding that sufficiency within ourselves first, and then going about our goals from that place, which is a very different energy.
We need more people like you in the NCAA, especially for colleges, because it seems like with the rise of mental health issues, especially like there's been so many cases of like athletes not getting the help that's needed. And I feel like it needs to be addressed, and the way you address it is really, really immaculate and great, because it you don't hear that a lot from, like, say, from like a coach's expertise. um
Mm-hmm.
what are some ways that the NCAA or colleges can provide more resources for athletes that they can be able to be comfortable with expressing how they feel and not feel like their feelings and emotions are dismissed?
Yeah. It's such a tough question, because I think so many of these messages are just ingrained in society. And I think we can feel it now. Like, we are going through this societal shift where we're talking more about things. But I think in terms of like the NCAA, I mean, a big thing is really about looking at leadership. I think we have to have more accountability with our coaches. And I'm not someone that's like, let's come in here and blame the coaches and say that they're the whole problem. But I think,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to have coaches understand this, because if coaches aren't doing their own work, they're going to be driving like to do more as well, because their kind of egos are wrapped up into it. And so I think that it really takes a different level of leadership, not just saying that because someone's a coach that they are a leader, but like, what does that look like on a day to day? How do they give their athletes feedback? How do they support their athletes? How do they work with their athletes? Like, actually, when you look at it, how are we evaluating our coaches and giving them feedback and making cultures better? And that's the work that people aren't doing. Like, people can go and complain about a coach, and then in my mind, nothing gets done about it. It's like, okay, cool, we have a complaint. Like, let's check the fucking boxes, make sure we've addressed it, and then nothing. There's no accountability, right? So nothing actually changes, and the same coaches are then going to other institutions and carrying out the same behavior, and they've produced a lot of great athletes, but sometimes they're doing a lot of damage to like the psyche and the well-being.
You bring a great perspective from like a coach's point of view too, because coach's mental health is just as important as an athlete's or a player's mental health. If a coach is not mentally stable, then they're not able to take the position of a leader and then lead their athletes, to success. I never had thought of it that way, because you guys really do have a lot of pressure and stresses on you to win and to keep your job. And so that's why a lot of times coaches come across in ways where we're like, oh my gosh, as athletes, wow, like either it's like attacking, oh, this is not good for my mental health, all these different things. But just as you said, Nikki, like it's important that, how are we addressing these issues? Not just firing a coach and then having them move on to a different institution, but how can they grow and learn from that? Just like we as athletes have to grow and learn every single day when we go to practice, like we're practicing to become better players and better athletes. So, maybe same thing can be done with coaches. There's like practices or something like that where it's whatever the issue is needs to be addressed, and then we take that into training. Maybe there's a training every year after the season ends, for each individual coach or something like that. I never had thought about it from that point of view until now you're bringing it up. I'm like, oh wow, it is actually super important for everybody's mental health, not just us as athletes, but coaches too. Like it goes full circle.
Yeah, I think just having everybody find that like personal empowerment, and again, making sure that coaches are given a chance to make the changes that they need to make. And I think also empowering the athletes to realize when things aren't right, or they're like, this doesn't feel right, the way that a coach is talking to me or treating me, or because it should be a co-creation with your coach. It's like your coach doesn't know
Absolutely.
everything about your body or what's right for you. And if they're trying to control you or manipulate you, like there are signs. And I think
Mm-hmm.
also just helping like teaching athletes about what those are. And obviously your coaches have to hold you accountable, and so they're going to be tough on you at times, so there is space for that. But like, what is the difference between a coach that is holding you accountable and challenging you and somebody that is like crossing that line into kind of manipulation, abuse, or not empowering you to make those decisions for your life and what is best for you as the athlete?
And why does it seem like people are so afraid, especially particularly like leadership and coaches? Why does it seem like they're so afraid to take accountability for, like, say, their actions, or say, like, the seasons that doesn't meet the standards of like the universities or the program?
Yeah, because I think it all comes down to, we don't want to acknowledge that we're not good enough. We don't want to be rejected. And as when you're in that leadership role, to acknowledge that you're not perfect. When you're in that power position, like, you don't want to necessarily be questioned. And so I think when you're not able to sit with yourself and kind of have that healthy level of, it's almost like love for yourself, really. When you don't have love for yourself as a leader, you can't take criticism, because then that means something about you. And so when you're healthy as an athlete or as a coach, you're able to take more feedback, because it's not about your self-worth as a human, but it's just trying to get better. And so I think authentic leadership is really about the ability to like sit in the discomfort of feedback, sit in the conflict, to have a level of contemplation and reflection, and to go inward and say, like, well, what if this is my responsibility to change, and to discern between, like, what do I actually want to change and what is just noise, because we don't want to take everybody's feedback,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes people's feedback isn't in our best interest either. And so, yeah, there's a lot of nuances within all of that too.
You know what I think is super important actually is just like constant communication between the players and the coaches, because yes, there's a lot of coaches that just want that dominant role over the players and they want to make that known. But at the same time, like we're all part of a team and working together to get to that goal of winning. So communication is key in every aspect of life. If a coach is able to hold a player accountable, then the player should also hold the coach accountable. Like, hey coach, I didn't appreciate how you talked to me today. And the coach should be able to take that and be like, you know what, I didn't approach you in the greatest way. And that lets the coach know, hey, I can't approach this player in that manner, and this player needs to be coached differently than Bob over here, who I can yell at, right? So like every person has their different way of being coached. So I think that if we leave that space open for coaches to talk to players and players to then also talk to coaches, it can be a whole circle of a greater community, and it will result in a lot more winning, and it will result in a lot less um, what's the word? A lot less buildup of emotion, just when you're able to talk it out, it's so much better. Like, I wish with some of my coaches I was able to get to know them on a deeper level, and I think that doesn't happen enough, where we're getting to know personalities
Mm-hmm.
and on, like, on a friend coach level.
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. I think that communication would just improve a lot of trust, but I think then it goes back to some of the time constraints, where it's like coaches have a million things on their plate and are constantly being spread so thin that, like, for me, that was always frustrating, because it's like, I just want to coach. Like, I would love to just spend my time meeting with athletes, but sometimes, like, all of the other responsibilities then got in the way, and it's like, then you're like so burnt out that you're like, okay, I don't even have space for this. So I think that is why so many people get into coaching, and then it's like, how do we take things off our plate where we're not just doing, the recruiting is a huge piece, or the admin, or like just so many little things behind the scenes. So how do you free up coaches' time so they do have time to, number one, work on themselves, but number two, like have that communication with their athletes? Because I think that would just change so much of what's happening in sport.
How would you say your experience was different between coaching men and women?
Well, I mean, it depends on where you asked me where I was coaching. I think that, yeah, it really did depend on the leadership. And I can say, when in my first coaching job, when I was at Johns Hopkins, I just love coaching men. They were super respectful. They were like all in. And they really listened to what I brought to the table. I think that there were other coaching environments where it was harder because there wasn't a level of respect. You could even see like the way that the men's team respected the women's team. Definitely sometimes in the Ivy League, that's the dynamic where it's like a different dynamic in the way that men respected women. And so that was definitely interesting.
Why did you think that it was like that in the Ivy League?
I don't think it's necessarily like the Ivy League, but I think it's just the way that the culture is set up. And I think that there are definitely microaggressions in certain cultures and environments that impact not only coaches and the way that they coach, but also the way the women's team feels in the presence of the men's team. So that was definitely interesting in different programs that I was in, because I always worked with men and women. I think generally like the way that you coach people is a little bit different, coaching men and women. And, I think while men they need space to be able to process their emotions. Actually, when you look at just like hormones and coaching them, like they don't always want to go into their feelings, right? It's actually not helpful when they're like going into battle and be like, well, how do you feel about that? Like in the moment, they're more running on that testosterone. So they don't necessarily want to be having those deep conversations. And, I've even looked at like relationship dynamics between men and women, and obviously we communicate differently. And so when you're just understanding that when you coach men in that way, like sometimes talking about things like that can be more stressful for a guy because it can lower their testosterone, which is really interesting. But women are the exact opposite. Like women, they need that space. They need to process emotions. They need to talk. They need to get it off their chest. Like being heard and just validated and given space to for women is so, so important. So I think before you just like go in and start coaching someone, like you do want to spend more time, having more of the feeling conversations. And that's not every single woman. There's obviously nuances between each gender and how people want to be coached. And we're all different. So it's learning how to coach each individual. But I would say like generally those are some differences that I would say.
You mentioned microaggressions in both like coaching the men's and women's. What do you mean? Like what do you mean in that aspect? Because I've never heard of I've heard of the term microaggression, but I don't understand it or know about it. Like, what do you mean by it?
So it's like very subtle things that are said in environments where they're not like egregiously against women, but kind of over time they add up. And so I'll just be open, like when I was coaching at Penn, that was constantly happening. I was there for 3 years. There was tons of talk about like what women looked like in their body and their swimsuits and what size suits women wore, and talking to the men's team about like, you know, the coaches like, oh, well, you know, who did you hook up with, or like talking about the weekend, you know. And so I think that they're not things that you're explicitly saying in an
Wow.
environment, but, and I've even worked with former athletes that have gone through that, right? And so they don't know, like, where is my body image insecurity coming from, or where have I learned that like I have to have this perfect body. And I think oftentimes it comes as a result of being in environments like that, where, you know, there's just a lot of conversation about women and their bodies and what it looks like, and the party scene, and like the cool guys are doing this with women, and they have the girl and they're head of the fraternity, and like all of that really ingrains into your psyche. And so I know
Yeah.
that it impacted me as a coach, and, you know, the way that certain men on the team thought about me, and talked about like, oh, if I can't wear yoga pants, because the women's team would say like, well, they're looking at you wearing yoga pants, right? Whereas if that were to happen at Johns Hopkins, like that wasn't the conversation, right? People respected me as a coach.
Right.
But I think you, as a woman, when you're in environments like that, there are things that happen. And I've talked to other coaches about this too, but like jokes to me about, well, these recruits are going to come here because we have a hot assistant coach, or
Whoa.
just people that have, you know, not just my experience, but other women have also had coaches say like, yeah, come here, you'll be great at recruiting. It's like, you would never say that to a man.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the audacity. I swear. It just seems like women, we had to continuously fight 10 times harder than the men, regardless if we are competition. It's like the whole stereotypes, the whole like, it seems like what we look like is a joke to them. So we're like now joke puns to them to think it's okay to talk. So it just, the audacity. Clutch
That's
pearls, I
amazing.
swear.
Well, I mean, I'm glad to hear that that's not your situation at every college, but it is unfortunate that that is still occurring because it shouldn't be. Women are sexualized, especially as a coach figure. We are in a you're in a power of authority, right? And it should just be respect, no matter whether you're a male or a female. Um, that's insane. So I know you wrote a book, Forever Athlete, and that explains how your sport doesn't define you. How, like, why did you write that, and how does that apply to you in your life, and then also the athletes that you've worked with?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
So the book was actually a project where a bunch of former athletes each wrote a chapter. So we all kind of shared our personal journey with sport. So my chapter was, I wrote like switching from the human doing to being a human being, and that's just, I think, been more and more of
I
my
love
journey.
that.
Yeah. Because like what I was saying, I think for so long, like I was in that hustle culture of like, oh, I'll feel better when I get the degree, or when I do this thing, or when I get to that top level. And there was so much drive and ambition there, but kind of coming back to what I talked about before, like it wasn't necessarily coming from a clean place from within me. Like I was thinking that I would be more worthy or more confident and more respected when I got there. And I think that really I'm still working on unwinding that, like really just being more present in life, and when I'm not working, being off and enjoying the time off. And I think sometimes we have to create that space for ourselves where we're just deciding like, I get to enjoy my life. I get to have fun. And that allows us to come back to our work stronger. kind of goes back to the other question we were talking about of like, how do we actually believe that training less will be better for us? But, you know, when your brain is rested and you're more well rested and you have more energy, you can feel more inspired to show up for your work than just constantly kind of being on that productivity cycle. But yeah, it's a great book. I had a lot of other great co-authors as well. And everybody really shared powerful stories about what they had been through and how it shaped their life after sport.
That's the book I saw on your website that I really wanted to get. That's the one. I was like, what was it? But my question is for you. What makes you more than like a coach and an athlete? And what do you see yourself 5 years from now with your business?
Yeah. I've come to this in the past few months and just really thinking about what it is that I do. And I think overall, I feel like I'm a healer in many ways. And I've gotten more into this spiritual realm in the past couple of years. I've gone through like my own spiritual journey. And I was doing this energy healing, and this woman told me, like, you were in a past life a medicine woman and a healer. And so I think the more that I do this work, it is about helping people heal, like finding who they actually are, not who they think that they have to be. And so I think 5 years from now, whatever that looks like, I just think that we're continuing to go through this shift in society, which it brings up a lot. I think it's a really hard time, but I think on the other side of all of this is people really coming back to like their unique essence and knowing that like everybody brings something super valuable to the table. And it's not about being the best performer. It's about being your best and bringing your impact forward. So I think just helping people heal from the conditioning, the programming that we've learned in sport and society, and taking the good. Like there's a lot of good things that come from sport as well. And
Absolutely.
just being for good.
I love that. I'm going to take that with me forever. I think I'm going to write it on my wall because I need that. Even though I think it a lot of times it's like I'm a human being, not a human doing. It's not what I do that makes me a good person, right? Or in anything in life, it's like we are meant to just live here, and we're given this life by God to enjoy. So we need to enjoy our life more and, really find our purpose. I do have one last question for you. What have you seen the biggest change in your athlete's life that you've coached, and why?
For one person?
Yeah, like what have you seen? Like, if there's one person that you've picked, that you've helped really transition their life, who is that? And you don't have to say their name, but like what was it that made that transition just so big and they changed their life for the better?
Yeah. Oh, picking one person. So hard.
What about like a top 3 or a top 5?
Yeah. So I think one of them is, a lot of people have a similar story where they're coaching in the Power 5 or they're at that elite level and they're kind of spinning their wheels, not feeling like they're really enjoying themselves. I've worked with moms that are coaches at that level, and people that are just in really challenging, I would say toxic environments, and helping them have the strength to believe in themselves enough, stand up for themselves, and actually walk away from that to find something that's more aligned. And just to be able to say, like, I'm going to live life for me. And sometimes that means coaching at a lower level, but then being able to bring more of themselves into the coaching and like really having that connection with their athletes. I have another coach that left kind of elite world and is still working with athletes behind the scenes, but has just totally changed her lifestyle. And I think the other piece of it is, the other stories are working with the professional athletes that I've worked with and there's just so much resistance for them to like let go of that and to step into their next role after being a professional athlete, and just helping them realize like there's so much more to life beyond sport, and to be able to like grieve that ending and really step into another version of themselves where they are having impact and they can find like that joy for life again that isn't just about competing. That makes me feel super fulfilled and happy, just helping athletes kind of through that as well.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it here. I love it.
Nikki, I feel like I could pick your brain all day. I actually need to like talk to you outside of this too, because yeah, this has been awesome. I have so many other questions. We can go on this podcast for literally like the next 5 hours. I swear. This stuff is awesome that you're doing. So we can't wait to see where you're at, you know, in a couple months from now and 5 years from now. And we know that you're going to impact so many other lives. So thank you for impacting my life and Ashley's life today by coming on the podcast. You've been amazing.
Yeah, thank you guys too. It's so fun to just follow along and Taylor, see what you're up to. I know I've been following you for a while, and I know you're just getting started on your journey. So
I know.
Yeah, you guys are super inspiring as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we appreciate you. I think you were one of the first ones to slide up on our little questionnaire and saying who wanted to be on the podcast. So we're glad that you did.
Yeah, always down for these combos.
Yeah, and also a little insight, because we're going to have one of Nikki's ex-athletes that she coached on the podcast in a couple of weeks. Her name's Callie Fama, so stay tuned for that episode. I actually swam with her growing up for a couple years, which is crazy. So small world, but we'll get to hear from her as well. Yeah, so we're super excited. But thanks again, Nikki. We'll keep in touch. And if you guys don't already follow Nikki on her social media channels, I will drop in the comments below. And she also has coaching available to you guys. So make sure to follow her and keep up with her and see what she has in store.
Thank you guys. This has been so fun, and best of luck with the pod.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, sister. And this is why she is serious, baby. We'll see you next time. Peace.